Greetings from the University of the West Indies Press. I am Karen Smith, Acting Marketing and Sales Manager, and it is a privilege to sit with Professor Rupert Lewis on the birthday of Marcus Garvey. Professor Rupert Lewis is Professor Emeritus of Political Thought, the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica. He lectured for 40 years in the Department of Government. For 50 years, he has been a public educator on Marcus Garvey and the Garvey movement. He introduced a course on the Garvey movement in the 1990s, which is still being taught. Professor Lewis received the Order of Distinction Commander Class from the Government of Jamaica in 2014. Professor Lewis is author of several books on Garvey, including Marcus Garvey, from the University of the West Indies Press's Caribbean Biography series, and other Caribbean radicals, such as Walter Rodney. He is currently writing a new book to be added to the University of the West Indies Press Caribbean Biography series. We welcome Professor Lewis and our viewers. My first question to you, Professor Lewis, what inspired you to write the biography of Marcus Garvey?
Well, it was the contract offered to me by the UWI Press and at the invitation of Mrs. Linda Speth, who was a former manager of the press. And she had this exciting idea of doing a short biography series that would be accessible to students or to any average reader. So I was enthused by this invitation, and I set about writing the book. But the inspiration for studying Garvey over these many years arose when I was in high school.
Okay.
And that was when Garvey's remains, his remains were reinterred in Jamaica in 1964. I was in high school, at Calabar High School, and my curiosity was aroused as to why this person was being spoken about in this way. Who was he? What had he achieved? Why did he merit the title that was offered in 1969 of Jamaica's first national hero? And then I met his second wife, Amy Jakes Garvey, who lived on the Mona Road. And as an undergraduate at University of the West Indies, I used to visit her on a weekly basis. And I became somewhat of a research assistant to her, because she was then also writing. And she, as listeners, viewers should know, had in the 1920s edited the famous collection of Garvey's writings, Philosophy and Opinions. So it's a long history that led me to writing the biography of Garvey for the Press UWI.
Okay. What three main points do you want readers to take away from reading this book?
Well, firstly, I want to frame these points in relationship to emancipation. The emancipation of African people from enslavement. Garvey, we are celebrating Garvey's 134th year. And he was born 49 years after emancipation. He was born in the Caribbean. He was born 22 years after emancipation in the United States. He was born 1 year after emancipation in Cuba. He was born 1 year in 1888, 1 year before the emancipation of Blacks in Brazil. And I give this background to indicate that his basic thesis was that until there is a universal link between Blacks, Africa, the diaspora, all over the world, then our freedom would not be realized. And our strength lay in our ability to link and to develop organizations and to affirm our belief in our race and in our future that we can build together. So Garvey comes out of a period of enslavement, a response to enslavement, and a period in which a generation, his generation in particular, is entering the 20th century with a vision that the 20th century we must realize our political freedom. And he is therefore Jamaica's first global leader. No other national hero or national heroine has achieved that status, the status of a global leader. That arose again from the vision he had of freedom. And thirdly, I'd like to also say that he is a tremendous philosopher and thinker whose writings continue to inspire generations in the 21st century. So in this regard, he is the supreme builder of the future of Africa and people of African descent. And to have held that vision and to have organized in over 40 countries in the 1920s. It's one thing to have ideas, it's another thing to be able to put them in practice in relation to building an actual organization that had 5 million people in the 1920s who were actively engaged. I have colleagues in Cuba this year. This year, Cuba is marking the centenary of Garvey's visit, and they are tracking West Indian descendants in Cuba today in 2021 are tracking the points at which Garvey traveled through Cuba, mobilizing Blacks in Cuba and meeting the president, President Menacol of Cuba, with his own shipping line. Now, to have achieved that 100 years ago, where a Black person from St. Anne's Bay who grew up poor and in a few years achieves the feat of not only developing an organization, not only developing a mass movement, but achieves the feat of building the Black Star Line, which actually traveled through to Panama, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Cuba, 1921. So we're seeing somebody whose record has not been achieved, his record of achievements has not been achieved by any other person facing the conditions in which he lived.
How does Marcus Garvey's vision still resonate among Jamaicans at home and in the wider Commonwealth Caribbean?
His vision has resonated a lot in 2020 in particular and continues today. The Black Lives Matter movement and the demonstrations in the United States over the televised murder of George Floyd saw demonstrations in which the Garvey flag, the red, black, and green, that flag was prominent in the demonstrations in so many states of the United States of America. So that he resonates because of two things. One is that a lot of the people who were in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, people who are now in the Black Lives Matter movement, if you check their grandparents, their great-grandparents, the Garvey heritage is still alive in many parts of the world today. So that the resonance of Garvey is still marked when people are, when you get, as the US young Blacks say, when you get awoke, when you are awoke, you begin to understand the supreme importance of reading Garvey, of understanding what he has said, and of interpreting his ideas in the light of different circumstances. Our circumstances in 2021 are different from the circumstances that he experienced. We have achieved through our heritage many things, but there are still obviously challenges that we need to take up. For example, one of the big challenges is the violence that exists among our people over sometimes things that don't appear to be important, but the first resort is to violence. There's a psychology behind that, and Garvey has writings which speaks to that. It's self-destructive, and he speaks to that. So he provides for the individual as well as for the group of people an orientation as to what we can become, how we can improve ourselves, how we can collectively solve our problems. And he appeals in particular to the shaping of our intelligence. Because Garvey has a saying where he says, intelligence rules the world and ignorance works for it. So when you're ignorant, you work for intelligence, right? Intelligence rules the world. And that was a central idea in his thinking. So he's relevant to the 21st century because in Africa and in the diaspora, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in the United States, the conditions of Blacks still remain below what it should have been by now. And the COVID-19 in particular, the pandemic, has exposed some of the inequalities which exist with respect to access to health resources and with respect to being Black being a liability with respect to people's immune systems and our subordination to certain illnesses, whether it is hypertension or diabetes. Black people seem to have more of their share. And these things emerge in the assessments of comorbidities in the pandemic 2021. So Garvey is there as a guide that we can call on for orienting ourselves to the future.
What do you think the message of Marcus Garvey would be to the emancipated, independent Jamaica?
The message would be, and you have to create Garvey had a newspaper called The New Jamaica, which was published between 1930 and 1932, thereabouts. And it's a vision of a new dispensation for the island. And the current generation born in the 21st century have to shape their own vision in their own time, in their own space. You can draw on Garvey, but it is the creativity of Garvey in response to his conditions, which is the big legacy for us today. What is our own creative response to the challenges of the 21st century? That is how I would interpret the legacy of Garvey for Jamaica today.
In the book, you speak of the genesis of pan-Africanism, owing much to Marcus Garvey's efforts for racial solidarity. How does the new pan-Africanism wave echoes the teachings of Garvey?
Yeah, let me say that the new wave has developed in a significant way over the past 2 years, largely due to the confinement of people. We are no longer able to travel as freely as we would like, but the technology has linked the diaspora in Africa. And I'm in touch with so many different groups in Ghana, in South Africa, engaged with projects and building communities, digital communities across the diaspora and with Africa over issues of economic development, of business development, of cultural exchanges over museums. I'm involved with the museum development in Accra, Ghana, along with many other people. So the technology has enabled links to take place with people in Brazil, with people in Cape Verde, and so on. So this has been a big push forward in terms of how we are reshaping a 21st century Pan-Africanism. And we draw on Garvey. There's a speech Garvey gave many years ago where he talks about to go forward, you need world reorganization. World reorganization for him meant the political dissolution of empire, that the British Empire would have to break up for the African countries, for Caribbean countries, and others to emerge. World reorganization in the 21st century has to build on that dissolution that has taken place in the 20th century and now seek to reform the global system. And there are three challenges that arise. One challenge, we're in hurricane season. There has to be global access to resources to deal with climate change. This is no longer an academic subject. It is a life and death subject for our people. Secondly, reparation. Reparation is critical. The Caribbean, Brazil, the United States, we built the wealth of the United States and many European countries. We are owed a debt, a huge debt. And one of our Vice Chancellor, Hilary Beckles, has been very active on this forum. The third thing is that the African Union, which is made up of over 55 states, and CARICOM, over a dozen states, need to collaborate on strategic intervention to change the global financial system and the global trading system. So Pan-Africanism has these three different pillars that relate to our generation and the generations to come, reorganizing the global system. And that has its roots in Garvey's philosophy that is still relevant today.
How does this apply to the current racial climate, Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, well, as I said, with respect to Black Lives Matter, Garvey is a huge source for the Black Lives Matter movement. In the United States, the racial question was frontally put on the table by Donald Trump. And the mobilization, particularly of African-American women, was crucial in removing him from power. The mobilization of African-American voters, led by our women, is crucial for the defeat of the Republican efforts to take away voting rights or restrict voting rights in the United States, because they are afraid of the impact that the Black voters have had. And Garvey himself, you should know, would give support to different political parties in the United States based on their attitude towards the Black population. And he said, we should have our agenda that we are pushing when politicians come to us. This is what we demand. If we don't get what we demand, then we are not going to give you our vote. So there's an example there from his own political involvement in the United States in the years that he lived there from 1916 to 1927.
And our final question to you, Professor Lewis. Do you have anything else to share with your audience about Marcus Garvey?
Well, what I'd like to share is the importance of women in the Garvey movement. And they were crucial. And there is no scholarship that is being developed. And this year's the 10th Marcus Garvey lecture at Liberty Hall on August 17th will be given by Professor Nathania Duncan, and she will be speaking on the role of women in the Garvey movement. It is a huge field of pioneering scholarship, which enables us to understand not simply Garvey's genius, but the importance of women in the Garvey movement and what they brought to the Pan-African agenda.
I invite you, our viewers, to purchase a copy of his book at a special 50% discount from our website, www.uiipress.com. Conditions apply. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel. On behalf of the board, management and staff of the University of the West Indies Press, I express my sincerest gratitude to our author, Professor Rupert Lewis, for speaking with us. A reminder that Marcus Garvey by Rupert Lewis can be purchased at a special 50% discount from our website, www.uiipress.com. Conditions apply. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for joining us.